Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Belle Darnesky and I am the Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Centre of Western Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting this event on Indigenous ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis people. We acknowledge that our water comes from Shoal Lake and are grateful to the First Nations that care for that water. We affirm that our commitment to never forget must also include confronting attempts to destroy Indigenous culture and nationhood and condemning attempts to deny that historical reality. We are very pleased to host this event at Westwood Collegiate, a school which has done tremendous work in recognizing the importance of history and in particular Holocaust education. Today, we present the third of 4 programs in commemoration of Holocaust Education Month. It comes at a time when anti-Semitism is surging globally and right here in this country. Many of us in the Jewish community have been stunned by the expressions of hate we are witnessing. Who would believe that death to the Jews would be trending on social media, on X in this case? Who would believe that Osama bin Laden's infamous screed that the Jews have taken control of your economy, through which they have taken control of your media, would go viral on TikTok? We also painfully mourn the dead in the ongoing war in the Middle East and pray for the safe return of the hostages. And we look to a day when Vivian Silver, of blessed memory, of her vision of peace will be attainable. We are thrilled to screen Peter Hutchinson's documentary, The Cure for Hate, Bearing Witness to Auschwitz, a film that traces Tony McAleer's journey from violent extremism to radical compassion. Tony is a former skinhead and Holocaust denier who went on to become a founding member of the anti-hate activist group Life After Hate. Profoundly aware and deeply ashamed of the lineage of hate he'd once promoted, Tony had long contemplated traveling to Auschwitz in the spirit of tshuva, of atonement, to bear witness to the inconceivable ravages of the Holocaust and to deepen his personal work against the rise of extremist politics. With an unprecedented surge of anti-Semitism swirling around us here and all over the world, Tony's work is more important than ever, as the clear and present danger of extremist ideology surrounds us and just how easily words can turn into violence. Now, just yesterday, dozens of neo-Nazis marching in Madison, Wisconsin and shouting Heil Hitler, waving swastika flags, shouted, "There will be blood." They also shouted racial slurs at bystanders. In the 1930s, we thought this would pass. We need to take this hate seriously, and we cannot afford to look away. We're grateful for our partners in this event, Peace Days 365, and of course, Westwood Collegiate. And I'd like to especially thank Kelly Hebert and Gary Senf for helping to facilitate today's event. And I'm so thrilled to have Tony with us in person today and Peter Hutchinson, who will connect virtually to the panel discussion later on. So now it's my pleasure to ask Gary Senf to say a few words on behalf of Peace Days 365.
So thank you, Belle, and I'll only say a few words, and my first words are thank you for coming. So it's a beautiful day outside, and we know that we're going to be doing Go Bombers very shortly, but it's a very important topic and subject, and we take the time to think about it and to be here and be present with us here today. So I work with a group that is part of the Rotary Peace Builders Club. And I'm not myself a Rotarian. I'm qualified as what we call Friends of Rotary. And our group tries to facilitate and inspire other community groups to take on difficult subjects, subject of human rights, subject of education, and help build a community. And one of the strongest words I think that I like to use is belonging. And so we've all come from very traumatic backgrounds, whether you're an Indigenous Canadian that's had that legacy or from some other parts of the world. Our ancestors don't go far back, you'll find trauma in their experience. So trauma is not unique, but it is deep and it's important. And the way we work with each other and the way we help each other belong is incredibly important. I'll note when you're driving down Portage in Maine, if you look at the Scotia Bank building, there's a slogan on it right now that says, "We all belong here." I think that's very powerful, and I'd ask you to look at that. And then, on the Indigenous front, Bell gave a very nice land acknowledgement, but I always appreciate also the words that we are all treaty people. So there's a couple thoughts. Tony has come here really mostly on his own steam, just being asked to help us to talk about this deep subject. I've known him for about a decade now, and he's just been very solid in bringing forward these very difficult issues. So he has a deep story to tell, and I think it'd be important. And so thanks for coming. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. We are going to screen the film now, and that will be followed by a panel discussion, and there'll also be an opportunity to ask questions.
What was unthinkable a generation ago is happening. The Holocaust is fading from memory. As we lose the last of the generation who survived the Holocaust, those that bore witness and lived to tell their story, we lose a vital link to one of the darkest chapters of human history. A stark reminder of what hate can lead to when left unchallenged. According to a recent survey, 41% of American adults and 66% of millennials cannot say what Auschwitz was. With over half unaware that Hitler came to power through democratic means, a lesson that Western democracies, perhaps now more than ever, cannot afford to forget. "20 years ago, I was a fervent neo-Nazi and Holocaust denier.
So what does all this say about Tony McAleer? How much of a threat is he?
I believe there are differences between the races. If that makes me a racist, then I'm a racist."
This is McAleer in 1990, inside the Aryan Nation compound in Hayden Lake, Idaho, headquarters of one of North America's biggest white supremacist groups. And it wasn't his first visit.
It's a life I've long left behind, but I continue to struggle with my role in contributing to such a dark legacy and the shame I still carry. The violence and murder the white supremacist movement fantasized about all those years ago, the violence I once advocated and encouraged, have now become a horrific reality, as acts of racially motivated terrorism have increasingly become the norm. Somebody asked me once, "How did you lose your humanity?" "I didn't lose it," I replied. "I traded it for acceptance and approval until there was nothing left." In the Jewish tradition, tshuva means return and describes the return to God and our fellow human beings that's made possible through repentance for our wrongs. Auschwitz has always loomed as a symbol for the legacy of the ideology I once espoused, and the fear that I may never fully atone for the damage I've done to the community I've harmed the most, the Jewish community. It was in that spirit that I traveled to Auschwitz, to bear witness to the unspeakable atrocities committed there, as a long overdue act of personal atonement, and in hopes of preventing others from following in my path. The inescapable truth is that white supremacist ideology, if left unchecked, always ends in murder, and we ignore the lessons of history at our own peril. 1941, Germany invades Russia. It needs a workforce for the war effort. Jews, political dissidents, and so-called undesirables being removed from newly occupied territories, predominantly Hungary and Poland, are sent to camps like Auschwitz and put to work. Auschwitz I, the original main camp on the grounds, is quickly expanded. With prison labor, a development zone is cleared, equivalent in size to 6,000 football fields, and reserved for exclusive use for the camp. But with the adoption of the final solution, 6 short months later, Auschwitz was transformed from a concentration camp to an extermination camp, and a second, much larger camp, Birkenau, created exclusively for the specific purpose of making Europe Judenrein, free of Jews. Agnieszka asked me at the beginning, "Why are you here?" And I had a rough idea in my head that I'd come to bear witness, at least as a concept, even if I wasn't sure how to put it into practice. But the more I would come to learn about the people and events that occurred here, the more I would learn about the act of bearing witness, and connect to this place on a level I could never have anticipated. The iconic sign above the gate at Auschwitz reads, Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free. The cruelest
It was in that office to which I repeatedly returned and where I was struck over and over again, where I was introduced to powerlessness and to shame. I was 11. A series of boarding and public schools in Canada and the UK would follow, all with similar outcomes. I rebelled against everything and everyone, rudderless and more distant than ever from my father and family. I longed for a place to fit in. Finally, attending my third high school in 3 years, I discovered the punk and skinhead scene. While in the streets among fellow misfits and outcasts, I had finally found a place where I felt accepted, where I belonged. But to earn their respect, I would have to join in the violence, which, fueled by alcohol, also gave me permission to act out my adolescent rage. We instigated or inspired violence everywhere we went. In the years that followed, the one doling it out. It felt like freedom, and it was intoxicating. Through this exchange, I received acceptance when I'd felt unlovable, attention when I'd felt invisible, and power when I'd felt totally weak. The ultranationalism and racist ideology, however, were secondary. It was the casual, lazy sort of political extremism that a person adopts in order to belong and be accepted. But in what Hannah Arendt describes as the banality of evil, that's precisely how it happens. As the skinhead movement grew in notoriety in the 1980s, it began to attract the attention of the old guard, and my network quickly expanded to include the notorious Aryan nations, the mythology eagerly consumed by those, including myself, looking for meaning, purpose, and that key piece in the young man's development, a paternal role model. By the age of 20, I had declared that I expected to be dead or in jail as a white revolutionary by the age of 30, a badge of courage and a point of pride. It's one thing to read about Auschwitz in a textbook, but it's quite another thing to experience it firsthand. These rooms hold the personal belongings of countless Jews told they were being resettled for a new life in the East. In that moment, while trying to take in all of those suitcases, with the names, birth dates, and addresses, I was reminded of this conversation I had with a Jewish friend of mine. I asked him, how were you affected by my activities as a neo-Nazi and an anti-Semite? And he told me a story, which I've since come to learn is a very common story of that generation. That his mother always had a suitcase in the closet by the front door, with passports and money, in case the Nazis ever came again, and they had to leave at a moment's notice. And I had to acknowledge that the climate of fear that my activities contributed to made sure that those suitcases could never be put away.
The feeling is shame. That shame usually shows up in the same place for me.
Because right now you are facing individuals. Because this all archives belong to individuals. Okay, so they're not anonymous anymore.
No.
Behind every single suitcase is stolen. Behind every single suitcase is a person.
It has a name, it has a face.
Yes. How old are your children now?
25 and 27.
You remember them when they were very young, very small.
They were 2 and 4 till
who were well into their teenage years, I was a single father. To see all of the shoes, ordinary shoes taken from ordinary people, all different shapes and sizes. Children's shoes lying beside men's shoes, women's shoes. I pictured my children, the children that have been my own salvation, who gave me the purpose and resolve to ultimately leave the movement in those tiny shoes. And I was struck that if the tables were turned and it had been my own children in me, I would have been unable to save them. Unable to save them from the ideology I once espoused. The final artifact room was the most powerful, and it contained the hair of 30,000 women. After removal from the gas chambers, women had their heads shorn, the hair gathered into 20-kilogram bales, and transported to textile factories, where it was used to make socks, blankets, military uniforms, and mattresses. It's widely accepted that some of the products manufactured in those plants are still in use in German homes today. Out of respect, and the fact that hair is considered human remains, we didn't film in this room. 2 tons of hair is on display at Auschwitz. I was so overwhelmed with the power of the room that I found myself frozen in place for 30 minutes, nauseous, shattered, speechless. Perhaps this is how it feels, and what it means to bear witness. In 1988, I was invited to attend the Aryan Nations World Congress, the annual pilgrimage site for far-right elements from around the globe, that took place on Richard Butler's remote compound in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
All the media is owned and controlled by Jews. So the Jewish view of life is what we've been brought up from.
Often described as the spiritual godfather of the white supremacist movement, Butler was part of a lineage that shared its roots with the German-American Bund of the 30s, the Bund that established youth indoctrination camps across the US, and famously packed Madison Square Garden 20,000 strong in 1939. And later, the small Illinois town targeted for having the largest number of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel in the late 1970s. But through all of my trips to Aryan Nations in Idaho, the man who made the strongest impression was Louis Beam, powerful, dynamic Vietnam War vet. Hardcore in his beliefs and uncompromising in his actions, he would become a decisive role model for me.
All enemies own and control the country. They control the communications, they control the media, they control the police and the government.
Beam had created the Aryan Liberty Net, the first use of computers to organize white supremacists and disseminate propaganda, a strategy I would come to embrace as well. Inexpensive, difficult to prosecute, and with a powerful reach, the early adoption of technology would become a cornerstone of spreading racist propaganda.
It's not hard. Where there's a will, there's a way. When opportunities present themselves for me to do other things which I think will be effective, I'll be in there like a dirty shirt.
Following the FBI takedown of the order and his own sedition trial, Beam kept his distance from any activity that might land him in jail. Instead, he began to advocate for leaderless resistance, acts that could be undertaken by cells of one, because cells of one can't be infiltrated. With Beam Underground, I followed his lead and example, putting my own burgeoning computer skills to use to create a Canadian-based Liberty Net.
You have reached the Canadian Liberty Net for Sunday, August 21st, 1994.
But in the law of unforeseen consequences, what began with crude online bulletin and message boards would see its full and dangerous potential realized decades later through the increasing sophistication of the internet and social media. Technology once used to find and disseminate information is now used to find and create community, a shift in paradigm that has sparked horrifying acts of violent extremism.
people, when they're in the military, to keep a very low profile, as we've said many times before, run silent, run deep.
Well, I could never have anticipated the devastations that my calls to action would set in motion and the ripples that would continue to emanate. In truth, I'd encourage people to do whatever they felt necessary to achieve our goal of a whites-only homeland, and it's now my burden to carry. I can claim that I never pulled the trigger, but I wasn't really complicit. I was a willing, impassioned advocate in spreading the sort of hateful ideology that so often ends in murder. When I was supposed to come here in 1991, I wouldn't have felt anything. I wasn't capable of feeling anything. We were so ideological in our need to be right that we couldn't look at the events honestly. I had so much invested in my identity, and I was, a skinhead, a white supremacist, a neo-Nazi, and a denier that could be wrong, challenge the identity.
Right. Yeah. It would ruin the identity.
But if I had traveled to Auschwitz before my identity as a neo-Nazi and Holocaust denier had been cemented, it would have changed who I became. All of the abstractions are made real here, a weight that gradually accrues, and a poignancy that deepens as you make your way through the camp. An appreciation of this place's sorrowful history fully felt. The old questions came up for me, as I knew they would. It's part of the reaction to not wanting to feel. Let's think about this, let's not feel it. I knew some of this stuff was gonna at least pop into my head. It's old conditioning because I haven't looked at the Holocaust since I was a denier. I was wrong. And I think that's the hard part, not wanting to accept both the reality of this place and that I was also a denier when I was younger. And there's no way that millions of people didn't die here. There's no way they didn't just die, they were murdered. I mean, this place is filled with evidence. And what it does to those who experience this, and especially those that are still with us, it's not just disrespectful, it's disgusting and harmful. That's disrespectful is too nice a word. Prior to the gas chambers and crematoria at Auschwitz, roaming death squads had killed more than 1 million Jews across Germany and the occupied territories. In what's been referred to as the Holocaust by bullets, Jews were shot and burned in crude open pits, or killed in experimental gas chambers using farmhouses or mobile gas vans. But the final solution required a more efficient and mechanized process of extermination. Auschwitz would evolve to become the largest of 6 industrialized killing centers, developed in semi-rural, isolated areas in the occupied territories, hidden from public view. Their strategic location along major railroad lines allowed for the expedient transport of hundreds of thousands of prisoners directly from the ghettos of Poland and Hungary. Can you share with me what each of the rooms was?
So long, narrow room with openings in the ceiling. This is the gas chamber. The next room, this is crematorium. First of all, building worked as crematorium to burn bodies of those who were murdered in the camp, who were killed, who were executed, who starved to death. But in 1942, that long, narrow room became first gas chamber here.
This initial smaller crematorium on the grounds of Auschwitz I was experimental. Originally an ammunition bunker, then a morgue, it was adapted into a provisional gas chamber, and the first furnaces for burning corpses installed. It could be argued that this is where the large-scale mechanized killing began, paving the way for the massive industrialized cruel efficiency of Birkenau. And walking into this space, restored to its original configuration, and the only gas chamber that remains standing at Auschwitz, is a deeply haunting and life-altering experience. But the experimental gas chamber and crematorium at Auschwitz I was merely the beginning. The Weimar Republic, the German government that spanned the period after World War I to the rise of Nazi Germany, was a vibrant and inclusive democracy, rich with social activism. At the time, Germany had the world's most prominent gay rights movement, an active feminist movement that had just won the vote, and workers' rights that included the 8-hour day and wage guarantees. So how did a country that had long taken pride in itself as the land of poets and thinkers, an enlightened, creative modern democracy, allow itself to fall under the cold boot of fascism and the grip of evil? The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, had left Germany humiliated. There had never been a war like it, and it had come at a terrible cost. The austere terms of the treaty, compounded by harsh French oversight and administration of war reparations, only deepened the shame. Combine this with the collective trauma of 3.4 million men lost in World War I, deaths that left millions fatherless. And is it any wonder that a father figure, promising a restoration of glory to the fatherland, could rise to power? By the early 30s, Germans were literally starving. Mired in the misery of a deep European depression, with unemployment skyrocketing as high as 40%, Germany was also reeling from an influx of immigrants, as over 1.5 million refugees, many of them Jews from Eastern Europe, poured into the country after the devastations and deprivations of the Great War and the Russian Revolution. In anti-Semitism, Hitler and the populist German political right found a convenient scapegoat for a complicated set of ills. Looking to assign blame for the humiliations of the Treaty of Versailles, a conspiracy theory arose, famously known as the stab in the back, pinning Germany from World War I Jewish political leaders. Put, Nazi ideology and the promise to restore German pride, with sloganeering that vowed to make Germany great again, was the answer to every dimension of its perceived vulnerability to the world. This is not, of course, an excuse for the horrors that follow, but does provide an understanding of just how easily vulnerabilities can be manipulated and polarization fueled. As psychiatrist James Gilligan once remarked, all violence is an attempt to replace shame with self-esteem. Hitler had a deep disdain for intellectuals and the political elite, and armed with a convenient lack of regard for both the truth and democracy, understood that people did not behave rationally. With a rare ability to rile up a crowd, Hitler was able to provide simple solutions to bewildering problems. Intuitively, he understood the power of psychological need, what people wanted to hear, what they needed to believe. In the words of historian Timothy Snyder, post-truth is pre-fascism, and the public rarely sees the damage to democracy until it's too late. And by 1934, it was too late. Walking among the remains of Birkenau is an eerie and disquieting experience. I can't quite put it into words, but you can literally feel the ghosts. The horrors of Auschwitz and the concentration camp are difficult to fathom, but Birkenau is something altogether different. A highly complex killing machine, incomprehensible in scale, the product of a detached, mechanized hate. The construction of Auschwitz II-Birkenau began in the winter of 1941 to ease congestion at the main camp. But this place was no camp. It was an intricate machine that required an enormous logistical operation and bureaucracy. I had seen the buildings of the Jewish quarter in Budapest and in Krakow, emptied of the people who had once lived there. Entire communities that had been made to disappear in a scenario that played out in cities across Europe, in an orchestrated plan of total extermination that ended here on the grounds beneath my feet. There's a clear line between movements that start with phrases like, Jews will not replace us, and an outcome like this place. I had come to bear witness, and now I could no longer escape the feeling that I was an accessory after the fact to arguably the greatest crime against humanity. This very road was the last road upon which so many Jews would walk.
It's Northern when train just arrived. In the distance, you can see the main watchtower, the main guardhouse.
Yeah.
That's that direction. People left the wagons. You can see how many wagons stopped there. So it was really huge unloading place. And then people were divided into two separated columns. Their possessions were already taken by big trucks. 2 minutes later began selection process. Between 70 to 80% coming to Auschwitz Jews who were deported in mass transports were designated as unfit for working, and then they were killed right away. Those who were fit for working, young, strong, healthy enough, they became prisoners of Auschwitz camps. Each level was for 5 to 7 prisoners, but we got also testimonies of some prisoners who said that even more than 7 prisoners were sleeping in each level. So try to imagine 7 or more prisoners in the middle, 7 or more, up to 10, and the top bunk, the same amount.
You have to see it this way.
Except basically they're often head to toes, not head to head together. So head, toes, head, toes.
It's hard to imagine that many people packed into here.
Yes.
As we walked through the cramped and primitive barracks, it became increasingly clear to me that there are levels of deprivation and trauma here that I've only begun to comprehend. Hell on earth.
The bottom part of hell, the lowest level.
As with Hitler and a generation of fatherless Germans, the Aryan resistance preyed upon the psychic needs of young men in need of masculine identification and strong role models. And I was no different. All the garbage around pride, power, kinship, and bravery fed into a simple yet brutal blueprint of what a man should look like and be rewarded for, and left no space for empathy, insight, or compassion.
Not the duty or the right of a small percentage of Americans who happen to call themselves Jews to dictate in every situation about every subject what's best for everyone else in this country.
Enter Thomas Metzger, former Grand Dragon of David Duke's clan, who ran for Congress in 1980. Having won the Democratic nomination for a House seat, the party took the unusual step of disavowing his candidacy
We do not believe there's room for him in the Democratic Party.
and endorsing his Republican opponent. Disillusioned and feeling disenfranchised from the body politic for his extremist views, he abandoned peaceful means of participation, formed the White Aryan Resistance, and embraced the philosophy of by any means necessary.
Dedicated totally to the white race. There is no right, there is no left. There's only the white race.
The white nationalists already felt excluded from the political process. So in our minds, we were forced to be radical, forced to stockpile weapons in preparation for what we saw as an inevitable violent race conflict. We didn't see ourselves as terrorists or violent extremists. We saw ourselves as the righteous protectors of the white race.
But violence sometimes is necessary to get a point across.
In 1988, shortly after Metzger was implicated for his involvement in the Portland murder of the young Ethiopian student, Mulugeta Sarah, I received a call from John, Tom's son, asking if I would appear on the Montel Williams show with him.
Tony Parnell, Mr. Tony McAleer.
Toronto is already a war zone. Shopping malls in Toronto are regularly looted by black youth rampaging. They go from one end of the mall to the other.
On Montel Williams, I wore the all-black uniform of the skinhead, but John Metzger, in the fashion of his father, wore a suit. Well-spoken and eloquent, they made the unreasonable sound reasonable, precisely what made them so dangerous. When I appeared on the show again, 2 years later, I was wearing a suit as well.
I encourage people when they're in the military to keep a very low profile, stay out of the files of the police, stay out of the files of CSIS, and as we've said many times before, run silent, run deep.
The strategy of mainstreaming was simple. Grow your hair out, don't get tattoos, go to college, join the military, join the police, blend in. Take an extreme position that only 1% of the population support and put it in a nice wrapper so that 5% support it. Now you've influenced the outer edge of what's considered normal and changed how people think in the middle as well.
We're too deep. We're embedded now. Don't you understand? We're in your colleges. We're in your armies. We're in your police forces.
This is how it works. Gradually, almost unnoticed, cloaked in language around job opportunities, nationalism, immigration policies, defending the forgotten man. Once a particular level of extremism is normalized, the next step is possible. Moving incrementally rightwards, rebranding the unreasonable, until authoritarianism is just within reach. If a denier comes here and he's open to change, he'll be changed, or she'll be changed. The scale of this place, the size of this machine, it's beyond comprehension. There's two stories here. There's the story of the prisoners, and then there's the story of the guards. I can come here and experience this place and connect to the energy of the people that were here and connect to the prisoners. But I think if I came here before, I would have connected with the guards. in certain circumstances, almost every human being has the capacity within them to do what the guards did. And that's why I think we have to remember this place. Because I think with fully experienced memory of this place, it's like an inoculation against that virus. But 20 years ago, I was disconnected enough that I could have been a guard here. I can't say that I wouldn't have been a guard here. It's a horrific thing to say, and it's a horrific thing to acknowledge. But I wanted to come here to feel what is here, feel who I am and who I'm not, and recognize that I think in humanity there's the capacity for great love and good, and there's the capacity for darkness, disconnection, and evil, depending on what happens to us as human beings. I don't think anybody gets born with the capacity to be a guard. I couldn't be a guard now. My pathway back from the white supremacist movement has been a long, lonely, and difficult one. I'd become a pariah in my community, and as my notoriety rose, it made things worse for everyone around me, especially my children. And then there was the violence. Violence my young children have been exposed to, in their own home no less, even endangered by. But the conflict, for anyone leaving an extremist group, is that identity and ideology have become entwined, and I was no different. I like to say that I had left the movement, but the movement hadn't left me. An unemployable single parent, disowned from family, friends, and community, it took years of therapy and work to fully get my humanity and my life back. Eventually, after years of stumbling through the wilderness like a dry drunk, years under the shadow of loneliness, shame, and angst, I found myself sitting face to face with my first therapist, Donald Barron. When I finally got up the courage to reveal my past, he leaned over the coffee table and with a Cheshire Cat grin said, "You know I was born Jewish, right?" As my cheeks burned with shame, he reassured me, "This is what you did. It's not who you are." No sooner had those words left his lips, I broke down sobbing. He could see the humanity within me, even knowing the harm I'd done to his people. Receiving compassion from someone, when I felt I deserved at least, changed everything for me. It marked the beginning of a journey towards the fear, the wounds, and the pain that I've been running away from my entire life. As I began to connect with others who had left the movement, I was struck by how many similarities there were in the stories. The personal reasons for joining an extremist group were repeated over and over. The search for belonging, significance, brotherhood, community, and purpose. The ideologies themselves, merely secondary. And when people discussed their reasons for leaving, two themes stood out. One was the birth of a child. The other was receiving compassion from someone they felt they didn't deserve it from. A pivotal moment in their journey away from hate.
Is there some reason to hope that the people who are in it can come through it?
Absolutely, and I would use myself as that example. I spent 15 years in the white supremacist movement. I was a skinhead, I was a neo-Nazi, and was involved in the white Aryan resistance, and I committed a lot of violence that I have a lot of shame for. I've come to call this radical compassion the cure for hate. Learning to have compassion for oneself allows for compassion towards others to emerge. And out of these acts of atonement and reconciliation, healing arises. Compassion is the antidote for shame. With Soviet forces having entered Poland and the Nazi defeat imminent, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered the destruction of all Auschwitz-Birkenau gas chambers and crematoria. As part of the overall liquidation of the evidence of crime, prisoners were forced to dismantle and dynamite the structures. What remains, however, is staggering and deeply unsettling in its own right. Not merely the scale of the structure's massive footprint, but in the knowledge that you're standing on the same ground that countless Jews gazed upon the sky one final time before being led down into the gas chamber.
Tommy, look, you can see remains of the gas chamber number 3. What we can see here is the result of explosion. In November 1944, devices from structure were removed, and in January 1945, before Soviets were here, Nazi generals destroyed the place.
Agnieszka then walked me through the brutal and dehumanizing process experienced by those sent to the gas chambers, those deemed unfit to work. Women, children, the disabled, the aged, and the sick were sent to the subterranean dressing room, bare, save for the bench-lined walls and numbered hooks, and told they'd be showering. Afterwards, the naked and lifeless bodies were emptied by a special group of prisoners, known as the Sonderkommando, kept separate from the others due to their first-hand knowledge of the system of extermination. It was their job to process the bodies, stripping them of hair and gold teeth before being sent to the crematoria, then reduced to ash. Soil testing conducted around the camp has confirmed that this human ash remains in the surrounding fields and waters to this day.
I would like to ask you one question. What would you tell families of those who were murdered in the gas chambers? You're facing someone who lost family here. What would you tell them now?
It's a heavy question. And I'd have to say, I'm sorry, I'm deeply ashamed. And I'm sorry that I did and said what I did, and that they had to endure unspeakable horror, and that people like me could make light of it or deny it. Makes the second crime against those people. And I don't think I'm in a place to ask them for forgiveness. I can't ask them of anything. It's not about me. I would also say that I will bear witness for them. And I will remember who they are and what happened here, so that no one forgets. That is my teshuvah. I was so incredibly insensitive. Cruel. Inhuman. That's what I'm feeling. That's what I have to own about who I was. I didn't fully feel that until coming to this place and understanding the sheer horror of what happened here. I have a lifetime of remembering ahead of me, and a lifetime of witness ahead of me.
So that's the task.
I've got the task. It's the least I can do. The very least.
This journey sent you here, led you into this moment and into this place for some reason.
Well, I can guarantee you this journey doesn't end here. As recent trends have sadly underscored, anti-Semitism and other forms of hate are not likely to disappear on their own. And the echoes of the Holocaust reverberate whenever people regress to scapegoating, polarization, or dehumanizing and divisive us versus them camps. And this exploitation of unfocused rage, channeled into issues around identity, immigration, and race, continues to fuel these fires today around the globe. Lest we forget, the Holocaust isn't the last time we've seen large-scale campaigns of genocide or mass atrocities in the modern era. And the grim reminders of what humans are capable of continue to surround us today. The true value in my story, and why I continue to share it, is that if someone like me can find my way back to humanity, someone who was once so disconnected from the humanity within themselves, then perhaps anyone can. My hope today is that stories like my own can somehow help young people to retain this humanity and maintain their sense of compassion. Because compassion, for oneself as well as others, is the only true cure for hate. Our lives and our history are filled with lessons we can't afford to turn away from, lessons we can't afford to forget. Auschwitz have long loomed as a symbol and a reminder of the hateful legacy I once espoused. Now it has become my teacher. There's a power in bearing witness on its grounds that can't be put into words. But Auschwitz is also a container for profound lessons. Lessons perhaps as important as ever as the echoes of history continue to reverberate around us. The inescapable truth is that white supremacist ideology, if left unchecked, always ends in murder. And keeping the lessons of Auschwitz and the Holocaust alive is a way to help ensure it never happens again.
So, thank you, Tony. I think it's so important for us to understand that it is possible to turn one's life around. It's possible to learn, and that I'm not sure if we can talk about a cure yet, but I think we can talk about an inoculation, and that is education. And so, as I introduce the panel, I first want to thank Westwood, and I want to thank Kelly, who has received some well-deserved awards, the latest one being the Prime Minister's Teaching Award for Excellence. Education is a powerful tool, and remembering is a powerful tool, and I think that history is sometimes relegated to a subject that is not required. I think that we need to talk about history, we need to talk about digital literacy. And, you saw that with a bit about Darfur, that as everything that we're hearing on the news today, this genocide in Darfur is continuing and it's being ignored. We need to pay attention, and we need to pay attention to what our kids are learning about. We need to talk to each other, and we need to try and combat the hate that is just proliferating around us today. So I don't need to introduce Tony because you just met him in the film. Our moderator today will be Kauser Ahmed. Kauser is an educator and a researcher in peace and conflict studies who has in-depth understanding of social conflict and its peaceful transformation. While serving in the UN peacekeeping operations in conflict zones, he earned experience in peace building, mediation, and transformative dialogue in resolving intergroup conflict. He's developed insights in conflict by studying social resistance, terrorism, and extremism in global and local contexts. He undertook several researches on community-focused conflict intervention, refugee crisis, and youth extremism in Western and non-Western contexts. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Winnipeg in political science and also at the University of Manitoba. He leads two not-for-profit organizations in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Well, Kelly, you just heard about, he's been an educator at Westwood for the past 16 years, and he specializes in history of the Americas, Slavic studies, cinema as a witness in the 20th century, and Holocaust studies. And Kelly has done many professional development webinars regarding the importance of teaching and learning about the Holocaust in secondary schools today. And of course, Kelly worked with the Jewish Heritage Center to produce a wonderful documentary with Holocaust survivors. Peter Hutchinson, who will be zooming in, is a critically acclaimed film director. His Healing from Hate, Battle for the Soul of a Nation in 2020 has been described as a raw masterpiece and examines the root causes of hate groups activities through the bold work of former skinheads and neo-Nazis who are now engaged in de-radicalizing violent extremists and transforming attitudes of intolerance. The companion piece is The Cure for Hate, which you just viewed, and is currently poised to embark on a nationwide EDU impact campaign underwritten by the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program. And so I now invite all our participants to the stage.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It's indeed an honor to moderate this session here this afternoon. And I am a researcher in the field of extremism and violence prevention through education. And currently I'm also running a federally funded project. And I've met Tony a couple of times in the past through Gary Center, one of our advisors of the not-for-profit organization that I lead. And this is such an enormous opportunity, and I think it's such a crucial time in our life and history that we have gathered here today to talk about the transformation, extremism, hate, And what is important, actually, the name of the film bears the Destiny Cure for Hate. And we all need it. I mean, it's beyond this room, it's beyond Winnipeg, it's beyond Canada. We all need that true element of compassion so that we become good human beings. So my plan is to, this afternoon, just to do a dialogue with Tony, who is present here today, and with Peter from virtually. Hi, Peter, how are you doing? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Nice to see, well, I can't see anyone, but nice to hear you.
Sorry, Peter, I'll be your eyes and ears today. So let me know who you wish to see. And we have Kelly today, of course, award-winning teacher educator this morning. So I'll start with Tony. Hi, Tony. Thank you for being with us, and it's an enormous honor to talk to you today about the film itself. I'll first start with the I think a number of words, phrases that caught my eyes today, and one is which was mentioned in the film as post-truth is pre-fascism. So I'll start with this one. If you can expand on it, because you are not only an activist, but you have also spoken to so many people over this past decade. So what do you actually want to convey to this story?
I think that's a better question for Peter.
Okay, Peter, do you want to address, have you heard the question?
Yeah, could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, so I was trying to get the question around
You're quoting the Snyder quote that post-truth is pre-fascism?
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted to note that I've spent a little bit of time in Winnipeg, so I have my Winnipeg baseball hat on today, just in everyone's honor. Yeah, I think, listen, I think that Snyder is one of the most sort of important writers and minds of our generation, and his understanding of European and Eastern European history in the wake of during and in the wake of the Second World War is really unparalleled. And I think it's a pretty, I see it as being a very straightforward comment that I see continually echoed around us. We've certainly seen it in the United States the last several years. We see it around the globe with the rise of particularly authoritative regimes and governments and parties. And I think whenever truth is an access to the truth, whenever the marketplace of ideas is constricted and limited, we all suffer. And as we've seen throughout history, as the marketplace of ideas is constricted or restricted, that does pave the way to the potential for fascism and totalitarianism and authoritarian control. I think it's a very interesting time to be discussing these things. And obviously we're seeing all kinds of different points of view, all kinds of different perspectives, all kinds of different propaganda in the news daily from all sides of the conflict that we see happening around the world. And I think for me, it's this clarion call for us to be very wary of ever restricting that marketplace of free marketplace of ideas. And I think it's something that's really valuable for us to keep in mind.
Thank you, Peter. So let's go back to Tony again. Tony, I think I would be interested to know, do you see any, or do you recall any transformative moments in your life when you finally decided that it is enough, although you had alluded to in the documentary. But we would like to know more intimately from you, what were those moments which really nudged you to leave the movement of extremism and slowly get into I would say, normal life or normal human being life?
It was a process rather than a moment, but there are certain moments that are catalysts in that process. And for me, it was the birth of my daughter, and holding her in the delivery room, and this little tiny fragile person in my hands, and she opens her eyes, and my face is the first picture her brain's going to take. And up to that point, I was a complete self-absorbed narcissist. Everything I did was for my own self-aggrandizement. I didn't care who I hurt, whatever, didn't matter. But in that moment, I chose to make decisions for someone else other than me and mine, with my children. And with my son born 15 months later, I got to parent him the way I always wanted to be parented. And children's love is infectious. It's hard not to love them back. And I had been so cut off from my emotional self, living purely in the world of ego and narcissism with them. And we get that way, we come into the world, and I think about who little Tony was. The bright, curious, mischievous, stubborn, defiant, sensitive, open to the world little guy. Life happens to us, and we put on armor to protect ourselves, to be safe. We put on masks to become someone who we're not in order to feel loved and accepted. And with my children, it began the thawing process of my heart and the journey from my head to my heart. And because they're safe to love. At that age, they're not capable of rejection. They're not capable of ridicule. They're not capable of shame. That comes when they're 13. But in that moment, it was safe for me to love them. And my children taught me my first experience with compassion. And so when we're compassionate with someone, we hold the mirror up and allow them to see their humanity reflected back at them, and they couldn't see it on their own. My children looked at me like I'm this magnificent, magnificent human being. That's not who I saw when I was a kid. They helped me. I could see something that I couldn't see, but I could see it reflected through their face, through their eyes. And they couldn't say the word compassion. They couldn't understand what that concept was. So compassion is it's a way of being. You be compassion, and that's what they did for me. When they were 4 and 6, when they're 2 and 4, me and the mother separated. When they were 4 and 6, I was a full-time single father, and my mother gave me the second lesson of compassion. Her love for me was unconditional. Her relationship with me was very conditional, and she taught me compassion when it's married with healthy boundaries and consequences. When I needed her help to raise children, I could barely take care of my own life, never mind 3. Like, well, if you want me to babysit, you can't be going on marches. If you want me to pick the kids up after school, you can't be going on TV. And she taught me that healthy boundaries and consequences, which was a very powerful lesson. And the sort of third lesson in humanity came from Barron, who's become a counselor, friend, coach, all of these wonderful things. And I'd known him for about 8 months, and we were kind of good friends. I didn't know him too much. He tells me in my first therapy session, but to receive compassion from someone who we don't feel we deserve it from someone who comes from a group that we had dehumanized, is an incredibly powerful experience. And in the work of Life After Hate, which I co-founded, I never would have got to Life After Hate if it wasn't for God. In the 10 years I was there, we probably helped over
700 individuals or families of individuals leave these movements behind. And there's predominantly two stories that show up over and over and over again. And that is the birth of a child as one that changes perception. And I'm not saying that some sort of fertility program for Aryan nations is the answer. It's not, but it created an opportunity to choose something different. And I think that, but that story shows up over and the other story that shows up over and over again is receiving compassion from someone who we humanize. I just want to say in a caveat here, I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's the responsibility or obligation of marginalized communities to do this work. This is something Doc felt he needed to do in his spiritual evolution, and that's where he was. He did it. It's an incredibly powerful gift. Should someone choose to give it, but it's not. It's not the responsibility, obligation of different communities. Those are the three sort of pieces of compassion that led me to humanization.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much. Let's go to Kelly. Kelly, why do you do what you do? I'll be short and sweet. I will be here all day. I do what I do to try to create a better world, and we do it student by student, day by day, minute by minute. And it's an honor and a privilege to be sitting here with all of you and sharing my experience with students in the audience and parents of students. That's how we reach one another, you know. And so that's honestly why I do what I do. It's not for the 2 months off. It's not for the paycheck. It's to try to create a better world for my kids, for myself, but also for the students that are here and their families. Excellent. Maybe a complimentary question here, Kelly. So you have worked with students directly, still you are. So what do you see in the young generation about the global issues that goes on everywhere, the access to information, overabundance of information? What do you see in them with regards to something? How do they take those things? So I find a lot of students are they're very curious. They want to inquire, they want to know. There's too much information that's out there, and I find that a lot of my students feel overwhelmed. Like, how do I sift through this in 5 minutes? Like, you can't do that, right? So it's about, I think, teaching them how to identify the sources that they're looking at, where they're coming from, you know, whether it's media literacy, digital literacy, but taking the time to develop a critical consciousness about what they're consuming is what I try to instill in them so that they can do it on their own. And a lot of it is just, how do we identify this? What are we looking at? You know, what is being sent our way? Because I think a lot of them do feel overwhelmed, and some of them have actually turned off social media because it's burdening them with something that they have no control really over, unless they just ignore it, kind of thing. And so we need to take the time as educators to teach them how to disseminate and deconstruct messages of hate, to understand the difference between free speech versus hate speech, which is, you know, complicated in itself. But I think it's having those conversations and a dialogue with them in a safe space where they can be open and feel vulnerable and know that they're not going to be judged based on maybe what they've learned, what they've been taught, and we can kind of make progress from there. I hope that absolutely. Thank you so much. So my next question to either Tony or Peter, because it comes from the film. Very interesting phrase again here. Identity, and you know, with the identity comes the idealism. And in today's world, when we see an increase of hate, especially anti-Semitism, and then followed up by Islamophobia, according to stats and report. So how do you really connect and then suggest for all of us to differentiate between identity and then idealism? Identity is, I think, a very core nature of all of us. We do seek identity. If we threaten with regards to some of our identities, we tend to resist. So what have you seen in the past? How do you differentiate between these two things?
Well, I think the challenge is when identity and ideology or identity and politics become intertwined. So it's one thing to try and get someone to admit that what they believe is wrong. Try and get someone to admit that who they are is wrong. Because for me, the white supremacy and the neo-Nazi ideology wasn't just what I believed. It was who I was. It was the friends I had, the videos I watched, the books I read. It was the music I listened to. It was the badges on the clothes I wore. It was every aspect of my life. It was wrapped up in that identity. And the challenge in this polarizing society is that, especially down in the States, you're either red team or blue team, and there's a whole, and what you believe is based on the team you're on. Like it's so much more about identity as it is about the ideas in the head. And I think it's important to recognize and understand that. And as a young person, searching for a place to fit in, searching for an identity. And I was, this angry kid in the punk scene and the skinhead scene is where I found that place to finally fit in and belong. And I know Peter has said a couple times, well, what if the chess club found you first? That's a possibility. And but there wasn't enough adrenaline in the chess club for me. And I'm just going to share this really quick story. When I was at Life After Hate, I remember receiving an email from a mother, and her son was 18. He was neurodivergent, very, very bright, but socially awkward. And she said, my son's online 6 to 8 hours a night, and he's, found this community of white nationalists, which is really terrifying. What scares me the most is that they have accepted and embraced my son in a way that no one has in his entire life. When he was in grade 7 on his 12th birthday, he invited the entire class to come to his birthday party. Not one kid showed up. And so you think about the thirst for community, the thirst for belonging, a place to fit in. If the flat earthers had found them and offered them that same level of community that the white nationalists did, and the white nationalists knew exactly what they were doing. I couldn't believe the earth was flat if that's what it took for him to find community and brotherhood and that type of thing. Peter, you want to add to that?
I think that provides a real solid foundation. Here in the States, there's been a lot of sociological research and study around shifting patterns of identity and tribal affiliation. And it's very interesting. I've seen this happen over my lifetime here in the United States. The party that you were affiliated with politically was never, it was never a defining characteristic when I grew up. And it's been very, very fascinating to see this shift towards identity being, as Tony is describing the way this happens. I've seen identity increasingly become intertwined with political affiliation. And there is this inability to see outside one's point of view. Of course, you end up being siloed in a lot of ways, and you're getting all the information that just simply confirms your worldview. But as Americans have become less and less invested in faith and the church, and other aspects, more sort of traditional aspects of identity, we've really very much become strongly identified with our political affiliation. And as Tony says, when identity and ideology become so closely intertwined, it's not this ideology or these ideas that you see as they become who you are, right? And so by saying an idea is wrong, it means you're wrong. I know I'm repeating what Tony said, but I think it's very repeated. One of the things that we do in the curriculum that Tony and I have developed and around the world working with teams is We talk a lot about identity, and we have several different exercises that challenge young people to really think about where their identity comes from. Is it an internal sense of identity? What's come from, their family, from their school, from their community? Is their identity an acceptance of those ideas and that ideology and those concepts, or is the identity is it a reaction to those ideas, or is your sense of identity really come from a place where you work through those different things and come to conclusions about who you are in the midst of all of this, all of this information around you. I think it's really important for young people to understand that they have agency in terms of their identity, that life doesn't just happen to us, that we define and we redefine our identity on an ongoing basis. I think it's very easy as an adolescent to feel like life is happening to you, and you thought, and you're not invested in that process. So we really try and challenge young people to think about that because it's so crucial. You see, there's such a tribal approach to so many things. We're being polarized in so many ways. You see it here with political parties. We're seeing in the Middle East right now, with the war. And that identity, it prevents us from seeing the humanity in one another, and it prevents us from seeing that we share more in common with people than the differences that we have. So it's tricky stuff. It's really important stuff to keep talking about.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. My next question would be about denial. And I was born in Bangladesh, and I was very thrilled to see a couple of seconds the case of Bangladesh genocide in 1971. So, Tony and Peter, to both of you, why do we deny when we have extraordinary amount of evidence in front of us, especially in today's world when we can access so much information just sitting here? What is the point of that somebody still denies the Holocaust, still denies the oppression and of the marginalized people? What are the core things that you have seen during your journey?
So we believe, that in the whole sort of neo-Nazi white supremacist doctrine that there's a hive mind, a cabal of international Jewish bankers that pull the strings and control everything in the world, and that if there's a bad immigration policy, who's the person in the shadows opening the door, right? And we believe that so much of that perceived Jewish power came from the sympathy and guilt generated from the Holocaust. So if you could attack the narrative of the Holocaust, you could attack the base of perceived power. That would be the rational explanation as to what was wrong. Nobody says the Holocaust never happened or nothing happened. What they say is, well, they didn't have gas chambers. They couldn't have killed that many. It was typhus. It was starvation. It was sure there was some shootings and some hangings, but it was disease and all these other things. The most predominant one that's viral on social media. There's a fellow, I'm not going to mention his name, but he uses the analogy of the Cookie Monsters, cookies. How many cookies can you put in an oven, and it becomes a mathematical equation, and that's I remember when I was in that place, you get to a whole place where people are reduced to ledger entries. You don't see them as humanity, you see them as math equation. And for me, I called up the crematory bank and said, how long does it take to make a human body? And work backwards from there. What they didn't tell you is they commit to coffin too. What they don't take into account in Holocaust denial is bodies that are starving, that are emaciated. that are put into enforced two at a time. And when you take all those factors in, everything up with it, you take that initial ignorant and malevolent viewpoint, you can cast doubt on the story of the Holocaust and therefore undermine the perceived sense of power. And so that's what it's about.
Peter, do you want to comment about denial?
Sorry?
Do you want to comment about why do we deny Holocaust? And
I would say, yeah, I think all I'd want to add is that, you know, we're seeing this dynamic play out in real time on the news every night in terms of the information that's coming out of the Middle East. And I'm hearing it in conversations every single day here in Brooklyn and New York City. And it's this approach where if you can poke holes into a little bit of data, if you can question one event and the veracity of it, or, you know, or the accuracy of it, if you can tear a hole in that, then you can discount everything that the other side has to say about what's happening, right? And I think that's the denier mindset that Tony speaks to so eloquently, right? I mean, and again, we're seeing this playing out in real time. You know, I know people who are very supportive of both sides of what's happening in the Middle East, and you know, some information comes in about what really happened in a hospital or a bombing or some atrocity, and if that can somehow be discounted, then everything the other side has to say is going so wrong. And I think it's something that's got to be really super careful about, right? And there's a lot to learn from the way the Holocaust denier's mind works, and what the goal is in terms of people questioning these larger truths. The larger are more important truths.
thank you, Peter. Kelly, you wanted to add? Yeah. Oh, I was just saying, 3 minutes for Q&A? 10 minutes. Okay, then we'll have Q&A with John. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll just touch upon it just briefly. If you guys have already done very succinctly. You know, it's about having an open mind and being critical of what we're consuming again, instead of just taking it for like 100% truth that's being sent to you, without getting into the algorithms and echo chambers of social media. Like, that's a whole other skill we need to teach students, of how do we deconstruct that before we even have a conversation, because people will believe the first thing they see and they won't question it. And this is something I spend a lot of my time doing with my students. If something were to come up, well, let's talk about it. Why do you say that? Why do you think that? And trying to do that in a way that is compassionate, right? Like, I really love that, not only analogy, but way of being, is that we have to be more compassionate to one another. And I find that with these kind of topics, it gets so emotional that goes by the wayside, and now you're questioning who I am and what I believe in, and I won't let you do that. And then walls get put up, and then you can't have a conversation anymore. So I think we really do need to kind of take those blinders off and build those relationships with one another, with students in the classroom or in school, in the community, with parents, and have an open dialogue where we can hear from one another. So thank you so much. I mean, these are so prudent recommendations, and especially the digital literacy and media literacy. These are so critical nowadays. These are not only theories now. It ought to be taught in the classes. That's what I believe. And in our project, we actively involve media literacy component. So I think it's time to go to the floor. And okay, so Belle is here.
So I'll just help out and help. I look at the questions. I just wanted to make, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, you know, over the course of the years, sometimes when there's been a crime, an anti-Semitic crime, someone in the justice system has the bright idea to say, oh, let's bring him to meet a Holocaust survivor. I think it would be a lot more, I think that means I would not put someone like that who is not considered the hurt that they've caused and considered, you know, what they've been thinking in their ideology at all. I would never put them with a Holocaust survivor. On the other hand, I think meeting people like Tony, who have turned their lives around and who have understood the underpinnings of this hate would be much more helpful. Okay, I've said my piece. Any questions? Yes.
On the second part, I'm not sure what the question is. Well, that's CBC archival footage. Yeah, that was like around 1990, 25, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Sure. So the question is footage of me when I'm younger, why was that recorded? And because I was a very active and also in a leadership role within the white supremacist movement, I did a lot of television and radio interviews. That's why I was on Montel Williams. So those are from CBC archives from news clips. So that's why those things were recorded. Just as a quick note of interest, about 4 or 5 months ago, I actually did a podcast with Montel Williams. So that was an interesting reconnection. The first part, excuse me, my parents hated what I was into. My dad was bombed by the Germans during World War II in Liverpool. And so it's a really interesting way to be angry at your father is to have a poster on your bedroom wall of the guy you're sent home.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Estelle Lamoureux, and my dad was a medic for 5 years during the Second World War. So I heard a few of his stories, but obviously he had PTSD being a medic. However, my question for you is, right now, our schools are hurting, and our teachers have a hard time understanding what they're supposed to be teaching. And what would you recommend as an approach? Because I've already spoken to Belle a little bit. What would you recommend as a way to bring students together? And I'm talking, Jewish students, Muslim students, and just the generic, which is what I was, a generic student into the mix. What would you suggest how we start? Do you have an idea of what we could do? Because I'm in schools a lot, and the kids are in pain. They're really suffering.
Well, I think the first part to that, I think, is really difficult to hate people that you've met and that you know. So bringing students together of different backgrounds, different faiths, different all those things, realizing humanity, I think that's an important piece. We built a curriculum which uses clips from the film, but at the core understanding, we talk about the 3 C's. That's curiosity, courage, and compassion, and how teach kids how to incorporate those 3 things. They're very powerful. Being curious about the other. Why does somebody believe what they believe instead of responding to them with judgment? Just because you listen to someone doesn't necessarily mean you accept their viewpoint when you agree with it. Right? So there's that curiosity piece is so much missing in our society because we're just too quick to condemn, we're too quick to judge. I believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings in this world is a mirror reflection of our own internal disconnection and dehumanization. So we need to get curious and connect with the other. We do that with compassion.
So would you go as, like I try to target even like kindergarten, trying to teach values like empathy, friendship, loyalty, all of those because they're generic in one way, and that we should all embrace. So maybe that approach as well. But I have to say, I'm so impressed with the film. Very hard to watch, but I'm also very impressed. The key word for me that I'm pulling away from here is about belonging, and I think a lot of our kids don't feel it.
Yeah, and so you think about the age 13 is a big age where people start to become involved in the real search for identity. So that's a great age. The values if you can get them in there before that period is also important. But that's a key age where that need to belong, the need identity. So it's so powerful. And how do we create student-led initiatives? So Peter and I just came back from basically 6 weeks going to high schools everywhere from Pittsburgh to the reddest county of Idaho, and actually we went back to Sandy Point, which is 20 minutes from Aryan Nation. So we actually went to the property.
Oh my gosh.
33 years since the last time I was there, which was quite powerful. But we heard from student-led initiatives that are happening. So the one school had this program, Nobody Eats Alone. So the students would volunteer groups, they would look for the kids that were socially isolated, that were sitting at lunch by themselves all the time, and went and sat with them so they, so that these kids, if you look at whether it's Dylan Roof or any of these kids are lonely. They're not socially successful people. How do we, it's important to call people out, call behaviors out. It's really important to call people in. And how do we do that for people that are struggling at the margins before they have found an identity which may take them down the path? Another group has another school, this is actually in Idaho, had Hope Squad. And so what they did is they asked students, who was struggling with an issue, who in your grade would you go and talk to? Who would you feel comfortable going and talk to them? And they went and identified those kids, asked them if they wanted to join the Hope Squad. I think they're in schools across the province, and they gave them some really basic skills to learn, and each grade sort of has one, and so there were these peer-led sort of peer counseling things that were happening in the classroom. There's ways to empower the students as opposed to lecture the students or whatever, and get them involved in the process.
You gave me a lot there. I used to be a high school principal, so those students exist, so I'm gonna have to go look for them. So thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has a question, it'd be helpful if you could, if at all, go to the microphone so we can hear.
If I could briefly add to that? Can you folks hear me?
Yeah.
That's right. Is another thing that, Tony and I really try and instill with young people and in communities in general is this concept that compassion is not a passive thing. Compassion takes work. Compassion, when you break it down, Tony likes to say compassion is empathy plus action, which I think is a really valuable tool for another. And it requires engagement. It requires effort. And there's all kinds of, wonderful programs that schools are developing around this. And in some cases, as part of this learning around the 3 C's, we teach kids pretty basic things. Like we teach kids active listening. We sit them down in pairs and we help them, we help to give them the tools, arm them with the tools and the experience to learn how to do active listening, to learn how to really be curious, to learn how to listen instead of to sit and wait for your turn to speak back, to really want to understand that other person and where their ideas come from, why they believe what they believe. And then to also be able to feel that on the other end, right? Like, how does it feel to be heard? How does it feel to be seen for who you are? It's a very, very powerful piece of compassion. And the other piece that Tony talked about, which is it's very difficult to hate someone that you know, is we have sat down and we've done workshops with communities around kind of helping them recognize ways that they can sort of maybe reinvigorate community traditions to create more of a cross-community, cross-cultural interface experience for people within those communities. Sometimes the resources are already in place. Sometimes there's ways to reinvigorate traditions that already exist to bring people together and have these conversations and interactions that are.
Yes. One of the things I've heard as a way of students getting pulled into radicalism is a first inquiry on the internet of how do I get girls to like me? Have you found evidence for that? What have you seen for just a very simple, basic thing? And it stems from the idea of belonging, wanting to be attached to people who care about you. I'm just wondering if you have any evidence of that or have investigated that at all.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. It was a little muffled. Could someone ask it? Maybe repeat it for me, Tony?
For young boys becoming radicalized, often it starts with a search of how do I get a girl to like me? And what is the evidence or understanding around that?
Around how do I get a girl to like me?
Well, I think they end up in some pretty misogynist spaces. I'm thinking Andrew Tate and stuff like that. I think part of it is we need to learn to have better conversations about masculinity with young men, boys and young men. There's not so much discussion of what healthy masculinity is like. There's a lot of discussion about what toxic masculinity is like. And I think if we're not careful, there's a push and a pull. There's the extremist groups will pull kids like that. In our discourse around the history of our society and how we talk about the patriarchy, we have to be careful that we don't push kids. We don't teach young men that they're wrong for being men or boys or male or whatever. We have to be very careful around those conversations. Those conversations need to be had, but if we don't do them carefully, we will alienate. And there is a crisis of masculinity, and there is a whole generation of young boys that feel alienated. And there's a whole raft of people, just like I was, that know exactly how to lure and pull them in. So we have to be careful about how we have those very important conversations.
I think what Brian's saying is so vital. It's so important. I mean, I didn't plan on making a series of films around extremism. I fell into it because I was interested in these issues around masculinity. I made a series of films around male identity and masculinity, which is precisely how I ended up meeting this group of really remarkable men that helped to create Life After Hate. And I even told Tony certain anecdotes that I've experienced with my own 14-year-old son. He is also struggling with what does masculinity mean, and he's heard the term toxic masculinity so many times that I think there's a false equation between equating masculinity with toxic masculinity. Not all masculinity is toxic, but young men don't know what the healthy version is. And when my son goes online to explore these things, and sometimes that can be, how do I get a girl? And sometimes it can be, what it means to be a man. And sometimes it can be simply asking a question about what toxic masculinity is. Because of the algorithms online, you go down a rabbit hole really, really fast. My kids come to me with stuff that he's watching on TikTok, and actually say, hey, this is kind of weird, but some of the stuff that this guy is saying around masculinity makes sense. Or some of the stuff that this guy is saying about, how white history is no longer being taught in his school. And so what scares me the most is young people who don't have the relationship with their kids who are present and curious and are able to have these crucial discussions to help them unpack this process that they're going through and they're trying to figure things out. Right? We all have to figure things out. A lot of us try and black out how difficult that figuring out was when they're 13, 14, 15. But there's such pivotal, crucial years. And a lot of this comes back to, parenting, role models, and how we're having these larger discussions with our children in our community.
And I really think that the three of you, that is Peter, Tony, and Estelle, are really speaking the same language, that we really need to start when our kids are little. We need to, it's not, you're right, there are difficult problems of all kinds in families. And it's our responsibility when we get them in kindergarten, even in nursery, to teach them what compassion is, and even helping masculinity. It begins at home, but it also begins in the school. Yes.
That's right.
Canada and the US and many other places are the most places of higher education where we really good moral ground. And instead, we just have a lot of things that time. And it's like nobody does anything, and everybody wants everybody runs rampant, and there's no accountability at any level, especially at the higher level. And so you go and you talk to kids in kindergarten and grade 6 and grade 10, and yes, eventually they'll be the people who get to university. But what do you do now? Like, it's horrible to watch that those are supposed to be places of higher education. And no critical thinking whatsoever. And I mean, even universities here, it's like nobody cares. And like, I wouldn't want to have a child now who has to go to university. I wouldn't even know where I'd want to send them.
But what's your question?
Well, the question is, what do you do when you have universities and colleges where it's a case of almost a evil triumph when good men do nothing. People just sit around and do nothing, and there's all these activities going on. People feel unsafe. What do you do with institutions of higher education? How do you change that? They're supposed to be the people changing it.
Thank you very much for the question. I do teach there, so I don't have the answer to it. But I'm trying to acknowledge that you are very right. And when I teach, I do see reflections here and there. But my observation is that it is a structural problem in almost all of our higher education institutes, with regards to policies, with regards to the way we structure dialogue between professors and students. And I think the way, let me give you a stat. In my current class, the students are taking 4 to 5 courses in a semester. And where there is a chance, because I teach global politics now, there is no scope of really bringing home the morality values that what we discuss about the conflict and where we stand. They are so much overwhelmed with the studies, and just imagine with 5 courses, there is hardly any time to think about anything else other than just finish the assignment and get the grade and go on. I think it's a big structural problem we are facing in our higher education. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, I would agree in part on that. I mean, I think we've got to be really, really cautious with our assumptions and our language here.
I don't believe that nobody cares, and I don't believe that colleges and universities are dens of vile scum. I think that's hyperbole, and it's not my experience. What I do think is that our educational system is a reflection of what our culture values. And as we've moved increasingly away from the liberal arts, and towards STEM-based education, towards efficient education that's driven by sort of neoliberal objectives, we move away from educating the whole person. We move away from people understanding simple things like civics, from understanding cultural and historical context. We move away from critical thinking, right? And I think that's our own doing. You know, our culture has created that. If we want to see different things in our education system, then we need to get involved. We need to make those changes. And I think there's a litany of things we need to do that. But I do think that, you know, I don't think there's a lot of value in finger pointing and trying to cast aspersions on what is merely a reflection of what our culture values. I think we've got to have the guts and have the courage to look in the mirror and say, yep, at least I can, I think, I can't speak to Canada. I'm a U.S. citizen. I see how it works here. But I think there's all kinds of assumptions that need to be reevaluated here. And I think the loss of a liberal arts-based education and educating the whole person, moving away from that comes at a very, very, very high cost.
I just want to add, I think also there's a temptation to fix everything that's out there. And it starts with us. Who we choose to be in every moment of every day inspires the people around us and gives them permission to do the same. So in order to get rid of the judgment and intolerance out there, we need to look into our own hearts and see, where do we hold that intolerance? Where are we judgmental? And only by removing it, it's not a grandiose act from a politician on a white horse that's going to make things better. It's millions of little tiny acts of who we choose to be in every moment of every day. And how, whether we know it or not, we inspire the people around us, for better or for worse. People see what we do and they will take whatever from that and emulate. Do we have to set the example? We have to be the example of the change we wish to see.
Well, and with that, I'm sure that you have some more questions, and I encourage you to speak to our wonderful panelists outside at the reception as you're having some dainties. I want to thank all of you for this amazing presentation. This has been so inspiring at a time when we really need some inspiration. And we just appreciate you being here in person, to you and Peter online. Thank you so much. I just want to say a few more things. We have 3 upcoming programs from the Jewish Heritage Center that I'd like you to know about. The first one is brand new. I hope you'll consider joining us in partnership with a brand new organization called the Jewish Community on Campus. On Thursday, November 23rd at 7 p.m., we'll be presenting a panel of experts to discuss the topic Anti-Semitism in the Wake of October 7th. Critical perspectives from Jewish scholars, community leaders, and activists. We are proud to co-sponsor this event, and in order to register, you just go to the Jewish Heritage Center's website, jhcwc.org/programs. Next Sunday will be the last of the 4 programs for Holocaust Education Month. It will be presented at the Bernie Theater on the Asper Jewish Community Campus. Dr. Ralph Stern from the University of Manitoba will present Two Streets and a Synagogue, Urban Encounters in Nazi Berlin. For that one, please register by writing to us at Jewish Heritage. That is the email address, jewishheritage@jhcwc.org, or you can go online as well to our website. And then a very different program on December 4th at 7 p.m., again in the Bernie Theater. We have a program called Jewish Women Talking and Writing with authors Harriet Zaidman, Carol Matus, and Eva Wiseman. And this will be moderated by Mavis Reimer, professor in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I want to thank all of you for coming today, for participating, and I invite you into the hallway to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, Elijah, you turn that speaker off.
Yes, I know.
So much